Hello, testing. Testing for sound. Are we good for the live stream? Testing, testing. I'm hearing myself. Are we all right on the floor? Are we all right in the booth? And we're okay for the live stream? Okay, amazing.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, no problem. Comrades all, good morning. Just one announcement. We would like to keep this area clear, please. Nobody should be in and about, in and out, or around this area, please. Thanks.
Viva socialism! Viva socialism! Viva socialism! Viva socialism! Abash capitalism! Abash capitalism! Did we not give breakfast this morning? When we say abash capitalism, what are we going to say? Abash capitalism! Abash capitalism! Good morning, comrades. It is a pleasure to be here at the Escola Nacional Florestan Fernández, a school that I'm honored to be one of the thousands of students who've graduated from this school in the arts of revolution. We're honored that the school has opened its doors to us to have this conversation today. We're honored because we have with us the presence of a special delegation from the Progressive International. If we can give a round of applause. We also have here an international course organized by the International Collective of Political Education, allied to the IPA, which is starting its 3-week course on method and methodology for political education, with students from countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, as well as the United States and Europe. We want to start our morning by asking our dear comrade, Rosana Fernandez, director of the school, to give an official welcome.
Bom dia, companheiros e companheiras. Bom dia, companheiros e companheiras. Para nós da Escola Nacional Florestan Fernandes é sempre uma alegria poder estar com a casa cheia e com o mundo dentro dela. A gente sempre diz
We always say that we don't need to go too far to know a little bit of what it means, the people and their struggles in each place of this world, because here we can share and live and have solidarity between everyone here with our experiences, and this class here represents that in this moment. As we have said before, since the beginning of the course, it's a class that's coming back after 2 years of the pandemic, and we are then really happy to be able to share this place, to share experiences, and to be able to think in the changes that we are going to have when we leave this place. In the name of the MST, in the name of the school, to be able to give in this Saturday morning a discussion about the challenges of the international left. Just before the eve of a victory of the Brazilian people, we are really excited and believing that this hope that the Brazilians have, we are going to be able to make it concrete tomorrow with Lula as president. Viva the people. Today, today in the afternoon, you guys are going to the Paulista Avenue, be able to feel beyond what we have already talked here, what it means, this will, this hope of the Brazilian people, even if it's in a representation in the working class that's going to be in the last activity of Lula's campaign. So with all this mystica, with all this enthusiasm, with all this expectation, this hope, and also with the anxiety that we can't wait for tomorrow at 6 p.m. to arrive so we know the results. We are walking and fighting and doing our struggle to be worth it, as it has always been worth it. So we can discuss the challenges of the international left, and we can propose that these challenges are going to be overcome by our organizations and by our struggle. Have a nice discussion, have nice reflections, and we're going excited and following even more starting tomorrow. Have a nice discussion, guys.
Viva Lula! Viva Lula! It's no secret that he is our candidate. We're not Brazilians, but we know where our hearts are. Always to the left, always with the people, always with the working class. I now want to invite our guest speakers to come up to the stage. We're honored to have with us today guests who are not just people of ideas, but they are, in their own right, leaders of the international left. These are comrades who, for many years now, have been contributing to the construction of a socialist project around the globe. But as we already know, because we've been studying this, the construction of any socialist project faces many challenges. So today we want to have a debate to learn, but also to keep building. No? Yes? Yes. We want to invite our dear comrade Jeremy Corbyn to come to the front. Jeremy is a leader. You're welcome to sit. Jeremy is a member of parliament in the United Kingdom and has been for decades a critical anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist voice in the halls of power in Westminster. When many refuse to talk, to raise their voice, we, the peoples of the world, know that Jeremy will be on our side. So we're honored to have him here. We're also deeply honored to welcome a comrade who's actually from the House, Kelli Mafort, leader of the national direction of the Landless Workers Movement of Brazil, a leading cadre of our process here in Brazil. We also want to welcome your very own teacher, professor, comrade of our political education processes and political coordinator of the Secretariat of the International People's Assembly, comrade Stephanie Weatherbee Brito. And last but not least, the rock star of the international communist movement, our dear friend and comrade Vijay Prashad, who is executive director of the Tricontinental Institute of Social Research. If you haven't seen or read our dossier yet produced by the Institute, I strongly recommend it. If you want to learn about the struggles happening across the planet, look up Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Now that we have our panel here, our esteemed panel, today's debate is trying to both raise questions, but also try to find collective answers to the questions that the left internationally is facing. We're living in a period of systemic crisis. Capitalism is unable to find new solutions for the problems that it creates on a daily basis. At the same time, we're also feeling or going through a crisis of bourgeois democracy as we know it. The bourgeoisie itself is in a deadlock as to what form of system and government does it want to rule with. In some places, it leads to outright episodes of fascism, civilian dictatorships, and other forms of rule. We actually want to start the conversation today by asking each of you, what do you identify as the main series of challenges
movement, which was introduced largely due to a coup which the United States was part of the orchestrator of. And I think that I want to start with that reflection in mind. I think that being in Brazil allows us to have a reflection on the challenges of the left, which points to the importance of us confronting US imperialism today. I think that it is undeniable that any process of transformation that seeks to develop countries which have been plunged in underdevelopment due to the primacy of capitalism and the profit for the few, any project that seeks to overcome that kind of a project that does not fulfill the needs of the masses in any part of the world is going to have to contend with US imperialism. Because what has become abundantly clear over the past many years is that the agenda that Washington has for most of the world is incompatible with the agenda of the working class people of all the world. Meaning, for the purpose of the United States, the interests that they seek to defend are those of corporations which have projects that have nothing to do with building wealth that can deal with some of the major issues that the working class faces today. So we are living in a moment where most countries around the world are facing challenges and issues that we should have overcome decades ago. Issues like hunger, issues like diseases for which there are cures for and for which there have been cures for decades, issues like illiteracy, which once again, we live in a time where it is absurd that I can hold basically a computer in my hand and use that as a source of access to information daily, 24 hours a day. And meanwhile, we have children all over the global south that don't even know how to read. And so how can we deal with that contradiction of having so many basic needs of working people across the world unsatisfied? That is a key challenge of the left, because we represent a project that seeks to address those needs very directly. And for those needs to be addressed, the working class of the world needs to be in positions of power, needs to take state power, because the bourgeoisie is not going to resolve those issues for us. And this brings us back to this question of imperialism. The projects of the working class that seek to address these basic issues require that we confront US imperialism. And so from the perspective of the space that I'm representing here, the International People's Assembly, we believe that internationalism and the global struggle against US imperialism and the struggle against the US role in intervening and interfering in democratic processes, their interference in the economic planning and the national sovereignty of countries around the world is a direct obstacle to the kind of development projects that we need to be engaging in. So I'm going to leave it at that and pass it to Jeremy, but I wanted to at least outline that as one of our key challenges as the left.
First of all, thank you very, very much for inviting us here today. I consider it a huge honor to be able to be here in this wonderful building with the movements, the social movements of Brazil, and I hope tomorrow brings justice with the social movements of Brazil. But I would also say that Lula winning the election tomorrow isn't the end of the story. It's the end of one chapter, and it's the opening of a much more difficult second chapter, where you try to transform society in the image of the working class and the rural movements of this country as an inspiration to the rest of the world. Our delegation here today has come with Progressive International. David over there is our coordinator. Give us a wave, David. A proper wave, nobody can see your hand. As a coordinator of Progressive International. And we also have with us a Uni-Global delegation over there. And I have my my partner, wife Laura, who's an organizer of the international work of the Peace and Justice Project and comes from Mexico. And we have my great friend and comrade, Zara Sultana, MP from Britain there, who is the newly elected Socialist MP for Coventry in Britain. And so we are deeply honored to be here today. There's a great deal I could say, but I'll try and be as brief as possible. For the left to win, it requires confidence, it requires hope, and it requires education. Millions of young people around the world are brought up in poverty, in hunger, and with insufficiency of education. But they're also brought up by a global media that trains them to be passive observers of life and their own life, not participants in it. It breaks my heart when I see 4-year-old children watching videos on a tab in McDonald's, watching other people leading wealthy lives, other personalities going around in big white cars and so on, as though that is something to aspire to. And that media message is fundamentally disempowering of people changing and improving their lives, disinformation on the reality of what is happening to this planet, and the insufficiency of an alternative message that is put across. Now, as one who has spent almost 40 years in the British Parliament, I'm very well aware of the power of mainstream media to try to destroy individuals, to try to destroy ideas, and try to vilify those people that stand up for the good of others. And so I am more determined than ever that through all of our work, Progressive International, Uni-Global, my own Peace and Justice Project, and so much else, that we do develop an alternative system of communication and an alternative media. We speak to each other through the largesse of 2 or 3 American platforms that decide whether we can talk to each other or not. That has to change. Otherwise, our independence as a socialist and working class movement is fettered and deeply damaged. And so, to me, media and information is absolutely key to so much of what we do. It's also facing the issues of today. I'll give you an example. In my own country, in Britain, we have an extremely right-wing government. We've just got another new prime minister. They change quite often these days, so I can't predict who it will be next week. And I don't really care, because it will be just another Tory who is doing exactly the same kind of agenda. But what we're having is a redistribution of power and wealth. We've just had a budget proposed which wanted to cut the top rate of income tax of 45% for those earning over £150,000 a year, which is about $170,000. And in order to plug the funding gap for the government, they proposed to issue more government bonds. So they were borrowing money in order to pay for a tax cut for the very richest. And the then finance minister said we were cutting the rate of taxation so we could collect more tax money as income to the government. I leave you with that question. You may have an answer to it. I don't. It's completely mad, the whole thing. Anyway, the fight back is huge. The poverty levels in my country are now that in my constituency, which is an inner city, multilingual, multi-ethnic society, where there's 100 different languages spoken, 40% of our children are living in poverty. There are more food banks giving away free food to those that need it than there are branches of McDonald's. There is a mental health crisis amongst the youngest people in our society, and there's a growth of racism in our society fostered by the far right and some of our media. And so we have that redistribution of power and wealth going on in front of our very eyes. That is the new economic norm globally, and that is what has to be resisted. The temptation of opposition parties is to appear, in quotes, responsible and follow the agenda laid down by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund about reconstructing society in the image of a market economy. Market economies create poverty. Market economies make sure there are winners and lots of losers. But there's a big fight back going on. Zara founded with others a campaign called Enough is Enough. Enough of this. We've had enough of this. We're doing something different. And together with all the trade unions and all of the social campaigning movements, including migrant and refugee groups, are marching and meeting and demonstrating next Saturday in London, the 5th of November. We are leading the economic fight back against the government from the streets and from the campaigns all across the country. And that is what we've all got to do in our own societies all around the world. I'll just finish on one other point, if I may, that the great issue facing our planet is, of course, the global inequality. It's also the environmental crisis. It's also the crisis of war and peace. There has to be an end to the Ukraine war. I do not in any way condone or support the Russian invasion or occupation, but I want to see an end to the killing, an end to the deaths. That is done by negotiation, by diplomacy, by intervention, by peaceful voices. And I hope that Lula, as a president, will be a sane and sensible international voice to try and bring about an end to the wars and conflicts that are destroying the lives of working class youth on both sides of every frontier. We do not need another Cold War. We do not need a new generation of nuclear weapons in this world. We need a generation of peace and a generation of improvement of the lives of the poorest people on this planet. The climate crisis cannot be solved by market forces. You cannot defeat climate change unless there is system change. There has to be a green industrial revolution that protects and extends jobs rather than laying people out of work and in poverty on the altar of middle-class environmental consumerism. It's got to be a change in attitude towards our environment and our sustainability. A world that produces for need, not greed, is surely something that we all aspire to. Our meeting here today, to me, global meeting, is an inspiration, and we can all learn so much from this. But above all, keep in touch and communicate with each other to strengthen our movements all over the world in the future. There are many more of us than there are right-wing economists who are trying to run our world. We've got a big, big majority. Let's use it. Thank you.
Bom dia a todos, a todas, todes. Prazer muito grande estar aqui neste painel com pessoas queridas, amigas, e também nesse espaço
and in the space of the school, with all of you that are. Can you hear me?
What's the problem?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And there's a space of debate and political education. It's a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists in the space of study, and salute to our comrades who are following this live stream. So I'm gonna speak today here from Brazil, from a Brazilian perspective, and all the challenges that goes through the electoral process that we want, and I am sure we are going to achieve this goal of tomorrow, have a victory in this great change that we have now in Brazil. For that political in all the world, but more than that, we have to understand very importantly there is a crisis in the capitalist accumulation process, and that this produces the process in the capitalist accumulation based in financiarization. Produces a great and also for nature, and this leads to an environmental crisis. This leading for us to put our challenges, our countries, our regions, and in the plan, in the international arena, and also in a structural way. But it's really important for us to have the capacity to understand the political situation on the contradictions, the potentialities, and the challenges, local challenges on our countries and our regions. Because that struggle today has characteristic that is international, because we are facing a model, a system that has failed, and always liberal promises, but also to supply humans' basic needs. This model produces in large scale challenges, inequalities, a society without work, and an environmental crisis that follows an impulse of uncontrollability. To oppose this model of the structure of development of the destructive, we have to put again in the word the flag of socialism, work as a project of socialism as a political project and the human social needs in front of those of the capital, but with the challenges of the local struggles, bringing a little bit of our reality here with the importance of elections, of tomorrow's elections. We have the possibility, concrete possibility to bring President Lula and face this process of advancement of a model that combines, on one hand, a very ultra-liberal face, but also on the other hand, it's really important. There's no fear over it. It is also fundamentalist. This model that the capitalism crisis produces, it is equally ultra-neoliberal, but also fundamentalist, and the leftists have to be aware of that. The progressive side of things have to be aware that we are not going to defeat model in crisis that is now taking place, and the way the coup is taking place, if we do not understand that fundamentalism and how historical issues such as gender, race, youth, and all other sexual issues, they are also central and are issue of class issues. Here in Brazil, we probably are going to win, but obviously there is this whole range of contradictions that we will have to face. First of all, we have to ask ourselves how this extreme right is going to behave when they lose the balance. Is it a coup in Brazil? From the point of view of a coup as intervention of a force or a military intervention as we had here in Brazil, we don't think that we have the necessary conditions for that to take place. This does not mean there is a will from Bolsonaro and other extreme right forces, but they don't have the support of the U.S. empire to develop a coup from the kind of military intervention. They do not have a cohesion with the bourgeoisie, with the capital, that could hold this intervention, and then do not have a force and a military apparatus organized to hold this coup. So I don't think that a coup such as intervention will be happening, but a coup in a sense of destabilization, of trying to dispute this government, another kind of lawfare, all of that can happen. So when we say there is not going to be a coup, we are not saying that we could be, we have to be attentive. Obviously, there is a very great effort that being done for this new front, this new coalition with the left, with center, force from the center, force for the right. And for us, the popular movements, this is not the main challenge. This is the challenge right now, like broad coalition. It's not a problem. Sectors of the agribusiness that are manifesting their support to Lula. For us, the movements, the government, it is an important part in the accumulation of forces. But what guarantees the structural changes are precisely the grassroots organization process of political education to organize a new force in society, a force from the working class, has the way it is now, so we can do the structural changes that we wanted to do. We from the movements, we have to look to this new future and think what we want, what are our priorities. The priorities cannot be many, those have to be priorities. And in fact, we have to see what we can expect from this government. Obviously, the way we show those priorities do not have other forms other than the struggle. The struggle from the movements are key for the new government, because we're going to have a very important dispute in our society. Lastly, this moment that we are living right now in Brazil, it has a very important potential to face historical problems, structural problems in our country that for a while we pushed forward. The rise of the extreme right, that is nothing new here in Brazil, but this political force of the extreme rise, it leads to a situation where the parties, unions, movements, they have to confront themselves with questions related with racism that is structural in a country that lived 400 years under a slavery system, a black slavery system. It was the last country to abolish slavery, and racism is a central issue in the history of the country. But it have always been put in a second place. But now, to face the extreme right, we have to face racism. Like the same way we have to face machismo, to face the extreme rise and all the manipulation it has on religion, all the issues of supposedly gender ideology. It is really important to have the protagonism of the women, of the youth. And also, we would have to face the extreme right and all its ramifications in the field of culture, religion. There are today here in Brazil around 1,100 groups of extreme right. Is a strong ramification of the extreme right in evangelical religions, but also in the Catholic Church. There is also now important articulation here in Brazil from the extreme right that is connected to children and teenagers. They are pedophiles. Right, they are pedophiles, and we have to say that. There is also an articulation with an extreme right that has been taking over politics more and more. We have a lot of challenges in the Congress. There is a Congress that is very conservative here in Brazil, where there is a Congress that is ideological. Those parliamentarians that tend to want to be very close to the government, to those who are in power. So even if we have a Congress that is very bad now here in Brazil, that was elected in the first round, conditions to advance in the process of sustaining the next government with this Congress, because there is this perspective, very pragmatic in the way they act. When we from a movement point of view, there is today a process of a lot of mobilization here in Brazil. There are several marches, mobilizations. We all here in a few moments, we are going to go to São Paulo in this march with Lula, with Pepe Mujica, and several leaderships from Brazil. We are going to feel the warmth of the streets. Tomorrow, in the electoral process, there are a few threats, but we have a good apparatus in terms of institutions and state polices that will guarantee the electoral process. We shouldn't see tomorrow a process of, protests or anything like that that could invisibilize the electoral process. That after the results of the elections, political orientation is that no one that voted in Lula stay at your homes. It is really important that, of course, there is a risk of political violence, but when we are multitudes and when behave in block and we go to the streets in block, we can put the extreme right where they belong. There is in the trash can of history where they should never have left. We will do this here in Brazil. We will have to do this in other regions too. And we will hold the government. We have this challenge until the end of the year. Lula will take place in January from next year, so we'll have very complicated moments, November, December. But we can imagine that Bolsonaro maybe will try to do something, but he does political power to sustain his, foolishness. So with all these challenges, I will ask you for all the international attention here. We know we have a lot of problems in the world, but if possible, keep with us, keep looking to Brazil to help us sustain this process. We have several committees of friends of the MSCT. We are orienting them to so they can go to the embassies to follow this process very closely. And when Lula is elected on Sunday, so we can also do an international mobilization in the embassies to show that the people here in Brazil, but also all around the world, recognize it from day one Lula as the president of Brazil. And we know how this victory is important for Latin American and for other people who are in the struggle right now. Thank you very much for your solidarity and for all the solidarity that you have shown with Brazil.
It's a lovely day because we are surrounded by comrades from Guatemala all the way to South Africa, also with Manolo and Stephanie from the International People's Assembly, Jeremy Corbyn, needs no introduction, from the Peace and Justice Project, and Kelli from the MST. This week, Jacobin Brazil released an interview with Noam Chomsky, who said that the MST is the most important political movement in the world. It's also a lovely day because it's the day before probably the most significant election for the world in this period. Because if Lula is able to prevail tomorrow, this is going to be of immense importance to our struggles around the world to establish decency, to establish a politics of love and not this terrible politics of hate which seems to have convulsed the human imagination. 20 years ago, Fidel Castro made a very important comment. He said that we are in a battle of ideas. We are in a battle of ideas. And in that battle of ideas, we are in a position of weakness. You see, when Fidel talked about the battle of ideas, he didn't just mean words on a page. He didn't just mean things people said to each other. He meant how what we believe is translated into institutional power, how resources are expended. Let me give you one example of our extreme weakness in the battle of ideas. Last year, the countries of the world spent $2 trillion on weapons. $2 trillion. Half of that was spent by the United States of America. $2 trillion on weapons. the annual operating budget of the United Nations is $3.2 billion. Now, you might get confused by my Indian accent. Arms sales, $2 trillion. United Nations, $3.2 billion. That, my friends, is an indicator of how the world is constructed and of our weakness in the battle of ideas. Our fight has to be to change that. We need to be spending more of our social wealth building the capacity of people to lead decent, dignified lives. We need to be spending trillions of dollars of our resources on ending hunger, ending illiteracy, giving people more leisure so that our culture in the world can be enhanced. It's a challenge for all of us. The challenge first, of course, is to recognize our own weakness and not exaggerate our strength. You see, one key element in the battle of ideas, whether right and then the far right and then the further right and then the insane right have been able to prevail, is in their idea of time. They have made billions of us believe that what we have now is forever. They've made us believe that the present is eternal. Nothing can really change. Maybe we can tinker with a few things. Maybe we can end absolute hunger. Maybe we have less starving children in the world. Maybe a few more people through charities and NGOs sprinkled crumbs off the table of Bill Gates and Elon Musk. A few crumbs will fall and there could be some changes, but the structure of violence will not be changed. They have won in capturing the idea that the future is impossible. They have stolen from us our utopia. They have taken away our utopia from us. The first time I came to Brazil, it was actually for the World Social Forum at Porto Alegre. I walked into this amazing festival of the Brazilian left. Music, samba everywhere, people happy, lots of t-shirts with interesting and funny things written on it. But then there was the slogan of the World Social Forum. The slogan said, "Another world is possible." Another world is possible. I looked at that slogan. I went and talked to my friends and comrades and I said, what is this slogan? Another world is possible. This is the most empty slogan I've ever encountered. Of course, another world is possible. In fact, today, 20 years later, comrades, that other world is emerging. That other world is fascism. Even fascism is possible. You gave me a utopia saying another world is possible. Even fascism is possible. That was the emptiest slogan of our movement 20 years ago. And do you know why? Not because we hadn't thought about what we were doing, but we were very weak. And our weakness was compounded by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Our weakness was compounded by the collapse of the communist state system. We didn't have the confidence to say what we actually believed. Because, comrades, even 20 years ago, those of us who marched under the banner, "Another world is possible," we knew what we were actually saying, but we didn't have the confidence to say it. What we were actually saying wasn't another world is possible. What we were saying is socialism is necessary. What we were actually saying isn't socialism is possible. No. We were not saying another world is necessary. Not socialism possible, not another world necessary, but socialism is necessary. That's the utopia that they stole from us. Billions of children around the planet have been taught over the generations to fear the very thing that can emancipate human beings and save the planet. The very social system, an experiment at that, which can emancipate humanity and save the planet from extinction. That very system people have been taught to fear. Just the other day, Mrs. Bolsonaro on television said Bolsonaro is the barrier to communism. Actually, that's true. Bolsonaro is the barrier to communism. But she was using that phrase to scare people. Fake news, to produce terror in society, because they have made our utopia into something to fear. The principal challenge of the left to me, comrades, is not whether we can establish this policy or that policy in our struggles. It's that we need to seize our utopia again. We need to be confident about our utopia, and not just as a set of ideas. Ideas are nothing unless they become a material force. These ideas have to be on the banners of our movements. We have to build these ideas in our movements, through our movements. Our people must once again believe in that great dream of socialism.
Well, we want to actually continue on this point. In a sense, we could say that the extreme right has actually moved from the battle of ideas to the battle of emotions. There is no more reason in discourse. There is no rationality. Science has no space in public discourse. We've been pushed to a very subjective conversation. A subjective conversation in which, in many parts of the world, the working class has been demobilized. Organizations have lost, I would say, not just their legitimacy, but the instruments of the working class have been under attack. We've seen that in the attacks against the Workers' Party of Brazil. We've seen that in the attacks against NUMSA. We've seen that in the attacks against so many working class movements around the world. We've seen that in the attacks against Jeremy Corbyn. There was a particular reason why they would not allow a Labour Party in a left and socialist direction. But there's a big question that often doesn't get answered in this battle of emotions as we try to actually rebuild collective life, and that is, what is the proposal of the left? Socialism is necessary, but what is the left putting and bringing into the current debate and discourse of society now? The MST often talks about the dialogue with society. What is that dialogue in society look like for us today?
Thank you. I want to back up on this subject of the battle of ideas to try to answer this question. And I'm really glad that Vijay introduced this topic, because I think that it is a fundamental challenge that we have right now. And I wanted to outline just a few ideas that I think have been successfully entered into the consciousness of the working class globally, that are a concrete obstacle to precisely the kind of change. The first one is that capitalism can be reformed, that it is possible through a variety of different means, more intelligent people, more analysis, different policy, different people in government and in positions of power, maybe a more representative composition of our governments, maybe more representation along lines that we also believe in, but that these are solutions that point to the idea that capitalism can be reformed. We can fix capitalism. And a corollary to this idea is the idea that the many social ills that we suffer from, such as lack of access to education, hunger, and lack of access to health, are the result of a lack of capitalist development, and not a result of the development of capitalism. So the idea that if we were able to develop capitalism further in many of the regions of the global south that are most impoverished, that would address poverty. That what we need is more investment. And that what has been guiding a lot of governments across the global south. The idea that the way to resolve the many social issues that we encounter is to create a climate that is friendly towards investment, towards finance, and towards more capitalist development. We know that this is a completely, not just a lie, but that it has been proven to be incorrect. That in fact, there is a correlation, a very direct correlation, that the more capitalist development, the more inequality. And that the capitalist development in the global north has resulted in more impoverishment in the global south. But the idea that it is possible through capitalist development to take many countries across the world out of the miserable poverty they exist in is still a very powerful idea. And it's an idea that has penetrated to the very base of the masses across the world. Another idea that we have been fed, especially during the past 5 to 10 years, is that capitalism does have solutions, and specifically that capitalism has a solution for the environmental crisis. That capitalism, through the power of the market and through magical science, will solve the environmental crisis somehow. That something about capitalism's ability to fund scientific research, their ability to reward scientific discovery, is going to result in solving the environmental crisis. This, comrades, is an absolute falsehood. And it's a profound falsehood additionally because actually those who are at the leaders of the capitalist system have no real interest as a priority in solving the environmental crisis. I think that we have to be very clear that it's not just that they have the wrong ideas about how to solve it, is that at the deepest level, it is not their priority. And we know this because they are actively exploring solutions for themselves to protect themselves from the worst effects of the capitalist crisis. The richest and the elite of our planet are actively building bunkers and exploring the possibility of space colonization because they know that the outcome of the process that they have put into place and which they have no interest in reversing is a destruction of all life on the planet. And so, however, they have convinced the working class of most of the world that they have this covered, that they will solve this, and that the market will be able to provide solutions. Another idea that has been very powerfully penetrated and that is very important for us to think about in the context of an election is that capitalism encourages and creates the conditions for a healthy democracy. So that somehow, historically, capitalism is the reason that we have liberal democracy and that capitalism requires democracy to thrive. We know very well that this is false. Capitalism has no interest in democracy once popular democracy results in the building of socialism. And that is why we see the rise of fascism. Because the more the people left to their own devices and based on their understanding of reality and based on their understanding of the inadequacy of the system to fulfill their needs, they vote left. And their democratic processes, uninterrupted and unbiased by fake news and all of the many efforts that are made, they go left. And so for capitalism, it is not interesting and it is not beneficial to encourage real democratic processes that are going to reverse the kind of policies that capitalism has an interest in continuing. Capitalism coexists very happily with authoritarianism and with fascism, as we have seen very clearly in the past 5 to 10 years. Still, though, capitalism continues to sell itself as a system that is necessary for democracy, meaning that somehow, without capitalism, the only outcome that we will have is authoritarianism, and that it's also the only system that is able to provide equality, that it is a system that is capable of providing space for development and for the representation of ethnic minorities, of people of all races, of people of all creeds, of people of all sexualities, and people of all genders. This is not true. This is a make-up job that capitalism is attempting to do because they understand that it is undeniable that keeping power in the hands of white men is incompatible with their discourse on democracy and equality. But there's no interest in addressing real inequality. Second, or last, an idea that capitalism has really intensely promoted, especially in our countries in the global south, is the idea that the lifestyle that capitalism promotes in the global north is not only possible across the world, but also that that is an aspiration that we should have as humanity. That somehow consumption equals development, and that having the ability to consume freely and consume without limits is something that represents the progress of humanity. Now, first of all, we know that consumption is a solution for a problem of profit, not a solution to social needs. And we also know that the kind of consumption that is promoted in the global north is simply not possible to achieve at a global scale, because it would require a destruction of resources across the planet that is incompatible with what exists physically in terms of the resources. And so all of these ideas, they actually conflict with the lived experience of the working class across the world. They don't have resonance in the reality that we have. And so what that results in is this battle of emotions question that Manolo was raising. Because knowing that these ideas are presented as the only ideas, despite the fact that in our lived experience, they are not proven to be true, leads to the working class, especially the youth, encountering hopelessness, the idea that there are only individual solutions to our problems, which leads to a variety of psychological epidemics that we're experiencing, issues with anxiety, with depression, and with suicide of the youth that is unprecedented in history. And the fundamental idea, which does nothing but to make us feel hopeless and lonely, which is that there are no collective solutions, that there is no gain from collective solutions, and that the only way out is trailing your own individual path forward. And so, comrades, we must engage in a deep process, not just to confront these ideas. It's not enough for us to say this isn't true, but we have to say what it is that we are proposing concretely to answer all these questions. In the International People's Assembly, we have been building a process called the Dilemmas of Humanity. Why is it called the Dilemmas of Humanity? Because we believe that humanity is at a crossroads, where capitalism has become not only untenable for the purpose of providing solutions, but it is a problem for us, our survival as a species and many species across the globe. So we're in a situation where the need to overcome capitalism is a dilemma of humanity. Because if we don't overcome capitalism and build socialism, we may not be able to survive on this planet any longer. That is a dilemma of humanity. And our role as organizations of the left is to lead a process to say, we need socialism, and this is what socialism will look like. These are the proposals that socialism has. We need to have ideas that have been tested and have provided to be true, because there are experiences in which socialism has provided solutions for the very problems that capitalism creates. We have experience in which the working class, organized in collectivity, has resolved the problem of hunger, has resolved the problem of access to health. We have countless examples where socialism has resolved the problems of illiteracy. And so it's not that we don't have answers, it's that we lack the courage to put those answers forth. And for us to be able to build that process, we have to ask the right questions, and we have to build those answers together with our organizations of the working class. This is a process that requires and will contribute to building the unity of the working class, because we can't build socialism on an island. We know the challenges that entail building socialism in one place alone. We know the kinds of attacks and sabotage that Cuba has been facing for decades. And we know that for socialism to triumph, socialism has to be built across the world. And so the dilemma of humanity is not a dilemma of one country or one region. It's a dilemma of the entire human race. And the solution to that is building the unity of the working class based on concrete proposals towards socialism. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and excuse me, thanks very much for the question. There's a great deal we could say in this, but I look at it this way. Trade unions have always been under attack from employers' organizations. That's obvious, because they don't want an organized working class in one factory, in one business, in one region, in one country, or indeed globally at all. The whole principle of a trade union is a class consciousness to improve and extend living standards and working conditions, and obviously that is damaging to the economic interests of those that own those businesses. And that's why in every country all over the world, it's been an enormous struggle to form trade unions and to grow those unions and to grow the power of those unions. And we have organized unions on the basis of traditional business models and traditional enterprises, where you organize people and you negotiate with a company and you try and get an agreement and you try and keep the company to it, and you represent members who are isolated or intimidated or attacked. What we now have in the world is the gig economy, the platform companies, the non-existent companies that you don't even know where they're based, and very large numbers of young people being forced to work on gig economy, self-employed, work from home, delivery workers, delivery riders, and so on, who are grotesquely exploited in living and working in incredibly dangerous conditions, and are not really being represented by anybody unless they're able to form a union. One of the most interesting meetings we had during our time in Colombia, where we were supporting the campaign for the general election and Petro's ultimate election, was with the delivery workers in Bogota, who described to us the dangers they face and the horrors they went through in trying to form a union. And so if we are to reach out and empower young workers who are the future and can provide the hope for the future, then it is up to all of us in our different political organizations to give a lot of effort into recruiting young people into unions and making sure those unions are democratically run and very effective in what they do. Which leads me on to the points that all of us have been making about the cultural aspects of our lives. Our children are taught often very strange forms of history in every country around the world, really peculiar forms of history. In Europe, often our children are brought up subliminally being told that all civilization around the world, all technology, all science, all learning, all music, all literature, somehow or other magically came from Europe in the 18th and 19th century, and that the period of empire was the great burden the European nations took upon themselves to try and civilize the rest of the world. I would urge people to read a number of books, one of which is a great book written by Walter Rodney called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. and in Latin America, I would say they should read Eduardo Galeano's wonderful work, Open Veins of Latin America, to understand the cultural destruction that went alongside empire and the mistreating and misreading of history all around the world. Because our understanding of where our knowledge comes from, where our cultural ideas come from, is an understanding of history. And too many of our young people, as I said earlier, are brought up having minimal levels of history in school, and also taught that they are individual cogs in a great big market machine, and to get on, their ability to get on is the ability to exploit the person next to them rather than their ability to form an act of solidarity with the person next to them in order to improve the lot of everybody. It's the collective versus the individual that we have to put our efforts into working on. The economic point in the world at the present time, as you quite rightly said, is that free market economics, capitalist economics, cannot solve the environmental issue, because the idea of a free market capitalist economy is about the endless exploitation of the resources of the planet. You can pour phosphates over the soil for a few years and you can get very high yields. You can get a lot of wheat, you can get a lot of soya, you can get a lot of all kinds of crops for a while. But you degrade that soil and you end up creating a desert. Look at the Dust Bowl in the USA. There are many, many other examples all around the world. And the capitalists then just move on to exploit somewhere else and do exactly the same. But of course, eventually you run out of land to exploit, you run out of places to destroy, and you've eventually destroyed the very lifeblood on which we all need to survive. So it is about production for need, not profit. It is about the philosophy of a society that looks after everybody rather than says it's a meritocratic society that looks after the very few and what they can exploit from the rest of us. So it is, in part, a philosophical argument. We have, at the moment in this world, as Vijay quite rightly pointed out, a sort of madness of military expenditure on... You see what I mean? Comrades working together, we achieve things. I'll hold it like this, very gently. Where was I? So the point I'm making is about how we develop the economic arguments of the world. The moment the vast expenditure on weaponry is being presented as a way of creating jobs in creating weapons of mass destruction, a new Cold War developing across the world, and new nuclear pacts being arranged, and an ever more dangerous situation. And it's going to be the poorest working class communities that suffer in all that, just as they're suffering at the moment from environmental destruction. So it is about what we do to educate people. The best form of education is the struggle doing things together. I've always said to students, you'd learn more about trade unions with one day on a picket line than you would on 6 months of courses in school. Because one day on a picket line, you understand you are there to support that group of workers who are trying to either defend or improve their living standards and working conditions, and therefore they're imposing an act of solidarity. That is a very, very important lesson to all people, particularly young people. So the answer to the question we all have within this room in our own different way, but it is fundamentally how left and left parties reach out into communities. We were yesterday at a popular kitchen just outside in the suburbs of São Paulo. That kitchen, yes, provided food for people, yes, provided sustenance, yes, it also provided play space and books for the youngest children, but crucially, it provided a sense of a people to come together and be empowered by their needs and their poverty to improve their conditions and therefore become a political force in society. The alternative is what? To go and borrow money from somebody at a penurious rate of interest in order to try and get by, get deeper and deeper into debt, and you end up then poor, in debt, and probably dead, and rates of suicide rise as a result of it. Health is in part mental health, in part it is solidarity. And so I would say what I've picked up from this wonderful few days in Brazil and on other occasions in my own country and different parts of the world is that sense of working class community solidarity is something we have to live with and develop and encourage all the time. Political isolation from the day-to-day lives of the people whose support we want to see for Lula tomorrow and for other candidates in the future will not bring about the changes in the world. It's only those popular movements. And above all, political education. I'm so impressed the movement of landless people in Brazil put so much energy and resources into developing this place, this space, this college to empower the workers of the future. It was no accident that the farming students at Ayotzinapa in Mexico were murdered. 43 of them were murdered. Why? Because they were peasant workers, they were working class communities, they were farm workers who were learning, yes, farming technology, but they were also learning socialism and social justice. They were murdered and their bodies were disappeared. We should never forget the sacrifice those 43 made at Ayotzinapa in Mexico and so many others all over the world. Learn from the history of those that have laid down their lives that future generations don't go through the same suffering.
It was never so true, this affirmation and elaboration of Marx and all the socialist legacy connected to the principal antagonism between capital and labor. Everything we are talking here, discussing in this panel, all those hardships of capital, they are only going to be overcome if the working forces could recognize themselves as a class, and if they can insert themselves in the real movements of history to defeat capital. That's why for us and all of our countries, it's so crucial to organize these working forces that not necessarily are identified as a working class. They're working forces capable of antagonizing the capital forces. And I would like to discuss a little bit of strategy. We have organizations, very important organizations, our parties, the legacy of our trade union struggles, the popular movement. They were nurtured for a historical time in which, with a lot of struggles, some losses, but it was possible to fight, to get new changes and move on. We are living in a historical moment in which the struggle for rights, the struggle for territories, for homes, for the land, is going to be always in front of fighting capital forces, extremely organized, and also more and more oligopolized plutocracy, I think she's talking about. And we need to first understand that when we are talking about a working class, we are talking about these labor forces, these working forces that are dispersed. Here in Brazil, we have 211 million people. 85% of those people live in cities, 15% only in the countryside. We have economically active population that's about of 110 million workers. Of those, 35 million are autonomous workers. Workers that have, most of them, their gain not by the time of their labor, but by production, or as Marx spoke in Capital, by piece. The payment by piece makes that the worker organizes their labor journey because they imagine that as much they are producing, the more they are being paid, but that's not true. This logic, that's a logic of dying of working, and it's making us to naturalize that people work. They have working journeys of 14, 16 hours a day. That makes us naturalize that the online platforms are organizing parts of the labor work. This makes us naturalize that we don't have organizations to deal with this kind of being in the working world. From the strategy point of view, we have good leftist organizations and with our legacy of the working class in the world, but those are defensive organizations. It's not because we want to, but that's the nature of when we were created, to think also about the changes that we are having in the world and in our countries. That depends of also of us being able, of our organizations being projected as organizations thinking themselves as offensive organizations. For that, we need to think of this resistance, but at the same time, to go projecting the change that we want. When we think here in Brazil, we had, not so long ago, the biggest number of enslaved workers here, analog to enslaved here. It was in the fields, in the coal, in the sugarcane, in mining. Not a long time. The biggest numbers of enslaved workers here in Brazil are in the richest cities in the world, which is São Paulo, and in the textile sector with women, a combination of this labor by themselves, autonomous labor, but also with the question of the sexual division of work, and also the return of child labor. It's being really acute right now. So we cannot delude ourselves. The working class has not shrunk. It has augmented. It has increased. The places that people have rights for working, that has shrunk. But the industrial centers, that has shrunk. But we cannot just cross our arms and think that our trade unions can only work with those that have labor contracts in the factories. That we don't have in Brazil. But we are learning from other experiences in the world of comrades that organize the labor, the workers, not only by their place of work, but also by the place where they live, that organize the workers economically, not by their position, but also through other types of mediation, but mostly that we can be daring in the sense of the popular economy, because the popular economy must have cooperation. If we imagine here in Brazil with the next government, this government with our ample front, if we're not capable to make a process of organization of this participation of the popular participation, and it doesn't matter if the government has public policies that won't result in an organic process to accumulate forces for the workers. Public policies with no class mediation, this goes away and it doesn't make new forms of conscience. That's why so many people here in Brazil who benefit from the social programs of Lula's government, they were pro Dilma's impeachment. They voted for Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro has a lot of votes here in Brazil, and this is connected with the ideological issue of conscience, and the conscience we change through the material context. And this is why we need to have a popular economy, cooperation, popular action from the base. Those are challenges, important challenges for all the organizations in the period to come. We need to meet this working class. We need to meet the people that work as delivery workers, the people in the textile sector, in the backyard industry. Those are our people, the natives, the landless workers, the quilombolas. This is our people. This is the working class. These are the forces of the workers that can defeat this model that wants to kill us in so many ways, with hunger, with viruses, murdered. We want to live, but to be able to say that, we need to organize the working forces. Otherwise, we would only have to be sorry for it.
In the state of São Paulo, Fernando Haddad is running for governor. Now, just a few weeks ago, Fernando Haddad was 17 points behind his Bolsonarista opponent. His Bolsonarista opponent who puts ketchup on his pizza. 17 points behind. But then Fernando picked up the issue of water, defending the right for people to have water not controlled by a private corporation. And he's closed that gap to almost 2% from 17%. He's going to win tomorrow. He's going to win tomorrow because he recognized there's a deep hunger in our people, demonstrated by our movements. Manuel was saying in Argentina, the struggles now against things like privatization are much more powerful than even 20 years ago. Cascading protests in Colombia that brought Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez to office. Cascading protests in Sri Lanka that didn't bring a progressive force to office. But nonetheless, the planet is filled, billions of people against privatization. We want more social wages. We want public transportation. We want public education. We want public delivery of water. We want public delivery of electricity. We want public this. We want public that. We want public everything. We want most of our life no longer to be captured by the private sector, by the profit sector. That's a deep and enduring hunger. Fernando has demonstrated the hunger of the people in São Paulo state for publicly controlled water, not for commodified water. So when we ask, what are proposals from the left? In fact, comrades, these are not proposals from the left. These are proposals of the people. The people want this. We are not imposing proposals on anybody. The thing about the left is the left has to accompany the mood of the people. We accompany the popular struggles of people. We are not imposing our proposals. We are bringing the proposals of the people, building power around them and fighting against the billionaires. Here's a proposal I want to impose on you. Here's a proposal I am imposing on you. You see, can you imagine this ambition of an actual human being. Elon Musk, whose family made their money in apartheid South Africa, he's not a self-made millionaire. He made his billions on the backs of black workers in South Africa who, under conditions of apartheid, were taken advantage of by his family. That was a down payment for his entire fortune. Elon Musk's ambition is to be the world's first trillionaire. That's his ambition. He wants to be a trillionaire. You see, when are we going to start an international campaign to abolish billionaires? See, we need our movements to start talking about the need to abolish billionaires. 22 billionaires have more wealth than all the women on the African continent. That means 22 men have more wealth than 325 million women. That, comrades, is an absolute abomination. That is an absolute abomination. And these billionaires have taken $37 trillion of their so-called their wealth, which is actually our wealth. They've taken $37 trillion and they've put them in illicit tax havens. There's enough social wealth in the planet to bring decency and dignity for people. It's not true, as the economists keep saying, that scarcity defines our world. Scarcity is not present in our world. We have abundance. We have abundance. Our problem is we have an abundance of wealth, but the people have a scarcity of power. We need to build our power to shift the balance of forces of who gets to determine what we do with that wealth. What do we want to do with that wealth? Make sure every child around the planet can open a tap and drink water from that tap. That is the proposal of the people. That is the proposal of the left.
These contradictions of capital, these proposals that the left is making, do not exist in a bubble. They do not exist in isolation. Often, we use the slogan, "Workers of the world unite." But the sad reality is that with the fall of the Soviet Union and the socialist camp, the concept of internationalism has often disappeared from the vocabulary of many movements and organizations of the left. I want to ask each of you to give a 2-minute closing statement. What space is there to rebuild an internationalist project in our moment in history today?
Yeah, just simple question. Look, comrades, I think that this space today is part of an active effort to build internationalism. Not only do we have students from around the world coming here to learn from each other, to exchange their experiences, and contributing to the development of each other's political education, but we also have the International People's Assembly and the Progressive International here together, coming together with a shared vision of the need to build the unity of the working class across all kinds of boundaries and across all kinds of borders. We have historic examples from the world communist movement about what solidarity and internationalism means. But I want to especially highlight the example and the legacy that Cuba has left us and continues to provide to us. Because when we talk about solidarity and internationalism, we're not just talking about support for one another, but we're talking about the ability that we have to see our reality, our future in one another, to recognize each other's humanity, and to see that our fate is tied up in the fate of our brothers and sisters around the world. And it's that spirit of internationalism that has impelled the Cuban Revolution to give not what is left over and what they have too much of, but give precisely what they have best, to give from the best that they have to offer to the rest of the world. That is the kind of internationalism and solidarity that we are trying to build here today, based on the premise that if you move forward, I move forward with you, and that my future and my project is tied up in yours, that I have an interest in the victory of the working class here in Brazil because it means something for the victory of the working class tomorrow in Ghana, because it means something for the victory of the working class tomorrow in Argentina or in Peru. Everywhere in the world, when one of us moves forward, it opens the door for the rest of us to move forward because it builds our self-confidence. It proves that the working class can win. And it's on that basis that we have to build internationalism, building concrete experiences where we support each other's political process, where we're willing to devote our time, our best cadre, and our resources to support the political processes of emancipation that are happening around the world. I just want to close saying one last thing. We have a task here in this room today, a very concrete task, which is to oppose permanently the military intervention in Haiti. There is no chance for democracy and for overcoming the crisis in Haiti under a military occupation, whether it's from the United Nations or from the United States. It is our duty to fight against this intervention, not only because we see the humanity of the Haitian people, but because their ability to push imperialism off its back is going to provide a change in the geopolitics in the region. We need to support the anti-imperialist movement in Haiti today, tomorrow, and until they have been able to push off imperialism off their back.
Thanks very much. Very briefly, the question is a good one. How do we, in two minutes, deal with the question of international solidarity? Are you attacking Comrade Stephanie? No, thank you. It's all right. Don't worry. I never put ketchup on a pizza. It's okay. First of all, it is about practical acts of solidarity that in turn educates people. There are 70 million people around the world who are refugees, victims of war, victims of human rights abuse, victims of hunger, victims of environmental disaster, victims of many things. Thousands have died in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean Sea. Thousands have died trying to get from Central America to the USA. Thousands have died in other parts of the world. They're the most marginalized, abused people on the whole planet. There are people who've been living in refugee camps longer than I've been alive. Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon, Vietnamese refugees, refugees from Burma, and so many other places around the world. They are grossly exploited and grossly abused. An act of solidarity with them is an act of education for the rest of the wider community. We have in Europe now a process of military pushback of refugees. The Greek Navy goes into the sea to push refugees back to Turkey. Various European forces do the same to push them back to Libya. And Britain is trying to push refugees back to France. It is the most disgusting and disgraceful abuse of humanity that I've seen for a very long time. European nations write self-deluding histories about what they did to support refugees in the past. Yes, there were occasions when immense support was given to refugees. The history of the early part of the 21st century will be, where were you, brother? Where were you, sister, when we were dying in the seas while your navies were killing us? Those acts of solidarity are very important, and they in turn become an education for so many others. It's also about peace around the world. Yes, the news media, the global news media, is full of the war in Ukraine. I understand that. And I've said what I said about the need for diplomacy, the need for a ceasefire, and the need for a process that brings about ultimately peace for the people of Ukraine and of Russia. But there are 40 other wars going on around the world, where arms are poured into Saudi Arabia knowing full well they're going to kill the people of Yemen, and so many other wars around the world. International solidarity is solidarity with those people that are trying to stop military intervention, as you've described in Haiti, and also the growth of arms around the world. But solidarity is also cultural. It's also about how we listen to each other's music, how we appreciate each other's art, how we appreciate each other's learning, and we learn and develop from that. That is what a global solidarity brings about. Those of us that spent years in solidarity with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, we brought people together to oppose the evilness of apartheid, but it was also easier to bring people together when you heard the music of South Africa, when you heard the music of Miriam Makeba and so many others, because that got a message going. The left should not separate itself from popular music, popular culture, popular art, popular poetry, popular literature. That is part and parcel of the lived experience of people all around. If we don't unite globally, as working class movements opposing the power of global capital, then everything that Vijay said, and he's correct, about the wealth and the power of the trillionaires of the world is going to get worse. I mean, I don't particularly mind if Elon Musk wants to take off in his own privately funded rocket and go and look for another planet. That's absolutely fine by me, and there's no need for him to come back. It's okay if he just goes. But the amount of wealth that is consumed and held in tax havens by these people ends up damaging all of our public services. Tax evasion and tax avoidance is lack of health care, lack of teachers, lack of housing, lack of refuse collection, lack of medical support for the poorest people in the world. Privatization of publicly owned services is an evil perpetrated against the poorest in this world. I lived through the Thatcher generation in Britain, when her government proposed privatization of everything that was publicly owned, particularly water, gas, electricity, steel, coal, you name it. It was all privatized. It was privatized in the name of popular capitalism. She claimed that everybody could buy shares in British Gas, everybody could buy shares in water companies, and everybody would benefit from the wealth of it. 30 years later, we have an entirely privatized water system in England. We have the worst level of water quality, the greatest level of waste there has ever been, and last year alone, there were 400,000 recorded discharges of raw sewage into English rivers, thus killing the fish, creating unsafe bathing conditions and dangerous water conditions for everybody else. That is what the greed of privatization brings about. So when we campaign for public ownership, let's not campaign for public ownership which merely replaces a faceless body of bureaucrats appointed by the government with a faceless bunch of capitalist bureaucrats who ran it before. Let's run it popularly. The workers that work on the railways know how to run railways. The workers that work in the water industry know how to run the water industry, and so on. You can repeat that all around. And I tell you what, when it's popularly run and popularly owned and popularly controlled, it's very hard for even the most right-wing, effective populist politician to privatize it because they know they won't get away with it. When they came for privatization of water in Cochabamba, look what happened. It ended up with a complete political revolution in Bolivia, sparked off by the greed of those trying to privatize that water. So solidarity is the message, understanding is the message, and listening to each other is the message. That's what we've got to do all the time, and never be afraid to speak up for the most unpopular underdog anywhere in the world, because one day it could be you.
You have probably know already that here in Brazil, the Northeast region has been having a position, a very progressive and leftist position connected to the elections, but also in other subjects, other themes. But there's a state, particularly the state of Alagoas, that has received billions, millions of money and the secret budget replacement there that has been a very dirty way to reorganize the budget, and it's actually effectively a way of buying votes during this election. And the head of the Congress of this state has 6 big regions, and we have expected already, but these regions from the capital, they're in Alagoas, most of them voted more to Bolsonaro than for Lula, because there was a lot of money to buy votes. But there was one neighborhood, one area that this didn't happen. This neighborhood is a neighborhood, it's a big neighborhood in which we are very happily and with a lot of joy. There's been 3 years that we are there doing work that's called the People's Congress. We have a place, we have weekly meetings, we do formations, we have developed an identity, we do popular economy on the everyday basis. This changes people's conscience. So thinking about socialism in these historical times, it means thinking solidarity networks. As worse we are living, it's worse. The increase of unemployment is going to make the working class to disperse. More people in hunger, it's not going to result in working forces uprisal. Really not. As worse it's the life of people, the worse is the political condition. So we need to want to elect progressive governments to have an average expectation of what they can give us, and do our struggle from the basis, organize the popular work to have popular power, to be able to say what are our demands, what are we capable of guaranteeing on the streets, on the struggle. This is our big way for socialism. And socialism isn't like only for the future that we imagine for the structural changes. Socialism means anticipating from this moment now the world that we want to build. So this is why that human relationships from this moment now, they need to be on our first priority, with the unconditional respect to the women, with the themes of race and sexual diversity. No real revolutionary can build the socialism only thinking about the big themes, because those are big themes as well. We need to anticipate from now a coherent practice of the socialists that we are, of people we want to change the world, but are starting from now that those human relationships that then can be converted with the popular power in the structural changes that we need so much.
You know, in my view, the left is inherently internationalist. Every generation tries to create new internationalist platforms, going back, of course, to the 19th century and so on, workers' movements connecting with each other. On the other side, there are cycles of anti-internationalism that convulse society. About 100 years ago, Rosa Luxemburg reflected on that line, "Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains." And she said, "Workers of the world unite in peacetime. During war, we slit each other's throats." It's not just about war that she was reflecting. The right thrives on toxic social ideas, narrow social ideas of chauvinism, extreme forms of racism, intolerance, caste oppression, and so on. Narrow, toxic ideas. These narrow, toxic ideas disturb the social possibilities of internationalism. Even in our movements, we have to fight inside them against xenophobic tendencies. For instance, anti-immigrant ideas, anti-refugee ideas, anti-black ideas. We have to fight against this in our own movements, because these ideas are the social conditions which damage the inherent internationalism of the left. Our work is very difficult. It's very difficult. Many years ago, as a child, I encountered a qawwali from Akbar Allahabadi, and this has become like the motto of my life. In the middle of this qawwali, the qawwals stop, and then they sing a line. And the line is, "Aadmi tha badi mushkil se insaan hua." And then the music starts again and the qawwals go at it. But that line has always stayed with me. "Aadmi tha badi mushkil se insaan hua." We were people. With great difficulty, we became human. With great difficulty, we became human. Comrade, it is up to us, our movements, to make that transition from being people to being human. Thanks a lot.
Can we get a big round of applause for our comrade speakers? Without a doubt, we have learned immensely. But this is obviously a conversation that firstly did not begin here and does not end here either. This is the conversation of our movements, of our organizations, of our trade and labor unions. It's a conversation that has to continue on the streets as well. We salute the people of Brazil as we go to victory tomorrow. We salute the people of Haiti who refuse to submit to foreign domination. And we salute international solidarity. We also want to thank, before closing this event, to give big round of applause to the Eleanor Marx Collective, the interpreters who made this event possible. It is with their help that we defeat the barriers between us. We also have a special gift from the school, from the students, from the CPP of the course, that is going to be presented to the speakers. To the working class.
All power.
To the working class.
Comrades, all power. To the working class. Comrades, listening to our speakers, I was like, am I in a church? Because the Holy Spirit descended and he told me that there's more work out there for us to do. If nothing descended on you, I'm telling you, there's a problem out there and we are needed to do more work. So all power. And I'm so happy that On this table, we have two women. Two women. Two women. Representing all the women in this room and in the struggle. So, on behalf of the CPP of the school, we present these gifts to our speakers. But first of all, I want to give to the women first. Comrade Safneen, thank you very much. Mwah. Comrade Kelly, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Comrade Jeremy? Manolo does nothing for you.